Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonkson, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Today we're talking with my really good friend, Pastor Muda from Michigan. He's got a great church out there, and we're talking today about separating friendship from leadership. It's an interesting topic. I hope you enjoy it. Man, how's everything going in your world? How's church life?
It's been busy. It's been interesting. It's been challenging, and it's been amazing all together. I'll be honest. We got into our building. Finally, we had been working on this thing since 2020, believe it or not. And so finally, I was able to move in 2020, end of 2021, beginning of 2022. So we're about a year and a half into our space. We're seeing changes happening every single day. New people are walking through the doors. And so it's an exciting experience because it almost feels like we're replanting the church all over again.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, dude, it's awesome to hang out with you on this podcast. And man, how can I help you today? What's on your mind?
Man, that's quite a bit on my mind. Thank you so much for taking the time. So much more than I believe the podcast could even. I can sit down with you all day. Just thank you for the opportunity to be here and allow me to pick your brain a little bit here. I have to say, Pastor Chris, I remember meeting you in 2016 and admiring everything that you did with South Hills and just wondering, who is this guy? I want to be like Chris Sonkson. I tell my wife all the time. And then to be on the podcast with you literally 7 years later is such an awesome experience. So it's an honor. It's an honor, seriously.
Well, no, it's my honor. It really is. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So some things that have been on my mind, honestly, some things that have been really challenging and trying to figure out is I heard a statement at a conference that I was that said revival is easy to come by, it's hard to maintain, and kind of the same sentiment of momentum is easy to come by, it's hard to maintain. So when a church hits momentum, when you get into a space where things are happening, things are moving, how do you sustain that? Because what I've seen in the past is we get to a point of momentum and it's crazy and then it just dies until the next event or until the next season. So how do you sustain it and keep it growing and moving healthily?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple things, Muda, is that I do think there's a difference in the types of momentum that we're talking about. I think there's times where God just allows seasons of wow, that was a, kind of a deep spiritual time or, exciting time or growing time. I think there are seasons. Ecclesiastes tells us there's seasons to everything. So I do think that there are seasons that you kind of go through. You kind of get a little high, kind of get some highs and then some lows or whatever. And there's seasons, growth seasons, all that season. And I think those are great. Those are awesome. Those are wonderful. We love them. I don't know if they are exactly sustainable all the time. You can't constantly live on the high mountain.
Yeah.
I think what the greater question is if you look at highs like this, it's like, oh man, it's going really good. Then it's going really good. It's kind of up and down. What is the base by which you are moving everything that's continuing to create growth? So in other words, not living on the hype, and though I love energy and excitement, but what is the platform? What's the system that's saying, sometimes things are real exciting, and man, what a season. It's been a couple months of just incredible services, and God's doing awesome things, and look at all these guests, and all these people got baptized. And that's awesome, but you don't live there forever. No church has lived there forever.
Right.
Not any church I've ever met yet has ever lived there. But at the base of the mountain, what are the systems, strategies, and processes that are in place that are going to keep it moving forward? It may not have that high-end energy that we're looking for, gets us all excited, but what is the systems and strategies and structure and processes that are going to keep us moving forward? So, it may not feel as high energy, but we're still baptizing a lot of people. We're still seeing a lot of people come to Christ. And sometimes it's really high energy. Sometimes it's not. It's just like anything in life, throughout your week. Some days are really, you're high energy, and some days you're kind of laid back. And I think that's with the church. I think the greater question is, what are the system, strategies, and structures and processes that are going to keep you moving forward so that you can maintain progress. You may not maintain the hype of momentum, but you maintain progress.
Yeah.
You're constantly growing, you're constantly developing, you're constantly getting better.
That's good.
I think that's the bigger question.
That's good.
At least it is in my thoughts.
So I've heard you share that about the systems, and I know that you're a systems thinker, and I've read your books, incredible books. In fact, we taught through one of your books on a Sunday morning. You even sent a video. Thank you for that. But what would you say are the key systems, especially in this season, the post-pandemic season, as we've seen church attendance and church metrics kind of get flipped on their head? What are the things that each church needs to be looking at right now? Like, are we striking the ground well on these things? Are we keeping a good base on these systems?
Yeah, I think that's great question. So what I would think is, like, if you get your team together, I think you have to ask tough questions. So someone asked me yesterday, it was in New Mexico yesterday, and I was doing some coaching with a team, and one guy asked me a great question. He goes, what questions do I need to be asking to know that I'm creating the right systems? Right. And the questions we need to be asking as we're looking at it is, what do we need? What do we need for sustainable growth? What do we need to keep moving forward? And do we have a system for it? So I look at things like if you and your team were on a call right now, I'd say, tell me how you become a leader at your church.
Okay.
So let's just talk about that for a moment. Nice. Because I think everything rises and falls on leadership is the old Maxwell statement. People always make fun of it. They're like, oh, it's a 30-year-old statement. I'm like, it's still true.
Still valid. You know? Absolutely.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. It's not like it's going to change. Everything rises and falls on leadership. It has in the Bible. It will to today. And it will for another 100,000 years. Doesn't matter. Right. So one is, okay, let's look at leadership. How are we developing leadership at the church? How are we raising up leaders? How are we developing the process of leaders? I think that's a big question. Okay. I think the other systems I look at are things like generosity. How are we creating the generosity culture? How are we developing giving? How is that becoming more part of our nature? The big one that I always look at, and I've said it several times here on this podcast, is I think you also have to look at the engagement process. Engagement being, how are people getting plugged into the life of the church, and how fast is that happening? Sure. Because to me, that's what's creating the sustainable growth. I was with 2 churches in New Mexico here in the last couple of days doing some coaching with them. One is up 47% in the last 12 months. We're talking about going from, 550 to 900 or something, whatever, 950, whatever the number is. The other one, they were shooting 6 months ago. We were saying, let's make your new low 300. Yeah. That was a huge goal, and their new low is now 325. And so now they're seeing the growth. But what happens is, like, hey, let's stop focusing on the growth. Let's focus on engagement. So how fast is that happening, and at what rate? I think you need to be asking those questions. How do I become a leader at this church? So if I'm a great leader and I start going to your church in Detroit,
there you go. Sure. Hey, you're just prophesying a campus for me, so
I'm trying to help, bro. I'm a giver.
Receive that.
So if I'm trying to, it's like, oh man, hey, let's create I come to the church and I'm like, okay, I'm a good leader, whatever. Well, tell me what you're gonna, tell me now, but the church needs to tell me, like, what do I do? And how do I go? And how do I move to that next level? And how do I become a leader at the church? And what spot do you have for me? And generosity, I think, is another strategy. And then engagement, always engagement over attendance. Attendance is a result, engagement is the activity. So how do I get engagement? Okay, how fast am I getting people plugged into the life of the church? Those are metrics that I'm looking at all the time. So naturally, I think we look at metrics of salvations, baptisms, and things like that, and we want to for sure. But the things that sustain that and create that are, okay, let's talk about leadership pipeline. How fast is that happening? And how good is that happening? How solid is that? Generosity pipeline, engagement pipeline. Right. What's the speed on that's happening? How fast is that happening? Is it easy, clear system? I always say that every system has to have 4 things: clarity, movement, alignment, and focus. So you look at your system and say, is there clarity to it? Is there movement? Is there alignment? And is there focus? Is it clear? Like, no doubt this is how you become, a leader in our church. This is how you grow in our church. There's no doubt this is the giving ladders. There's no doubt this is, I come to the church, I like it, and then now I'm going to get engaged into the life of the church. Here's why I think engagement is so important.
Wow.
I've been saying this a lot in the last few months on this podcast. Engagement over attendance. Look at engagement. Look at engagement. Look at engagement.
Wow.
Bottom line is that's what we're looking at. How in the next 90 days, 100 days, how many new volunteers are you getting involved? New ones involved in the church. Here's why that's important. Because this is the cycle of someone that comes to your church, Muda. It goes like this. They come to your church on whatever day and they attend. Maybe they like it enough and they keep coming. So now they go from attending it to liking it to, now they're coming fairly regularly. At some point in that journey, it's going to go from I attended to I like it to I romanticize it. Romanticize it looks like this. Man, I love your church, Pastor Muda. You're not like the other church.
Oh my gosh.
And you got to be careful with that because eventually you'll be that other church.
You'll be
and so
I just felt triggered even when you said that. I was like, oh God, I've heard that before.
You're not like the other church. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be the other church in a few months when you realize we're not perfect. So does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
So they romanticize it. I love it. It's great. It's awesome. And then during that phase where they go from I like it to I tend to I romanticize, tension will take place. Tension of I didn't like what the pastor said. I didn't like this. I didn't like that. Whatever. They're gonna realize their utopia is going to be shattered.
Right.
And either
it's a real place.
Yeah, it's a real place. Either A, they're going to go, they're going to bail out, or B, they're going to keep going. And the reason they'll keep going is they belong to a tribe. And the reason they belong to a tribe is because they joined a ministry, engagement. They got into a group or they got into a serve team. Yeah. If that happens, the likelihood of them staying is radically increased. If it doesn't happen when romanticizing is over, the chances of them leaving are pretty strong. So that's why we want to get them into the cement of the church quicker. So you got to be looking at that third one, the leadership giving strategies, those are strategies, all those. Okay, are we clear about those? But then the engagement as well, because
that's huge.
Because people rarely leave when they're a tribe. Wow. And when they do, they leave in tribes.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
That's fact.
So,
that's fact.
But if they have relationship, I'll talk to certain people where they don't like, they're upset that the pastor did this, the pastor did that, but they have friends there.
Yeah.
They're not going to leave. It doesn't matter how bad it gets. If they got friends there, they'll stay.
Right.
So engagement is what creates the friendship and what creates the tribe. And so when romanticizing faces tension, it'll at least keep growing and they'll at least stay plugged in, most likely because they belong to tribe.
Man, this is gold. I told you 25 minutes is not enough because now you've literally triggered another question. I have to ask this because of that. So is it wrong, because I've just walked through this situation, is it wrong for someone to stay in a church even though they are frustrated with the leadership, they're frustrated with the way things are going because that's not the way they would do it, but their friends, their family are still there? Is it wrong for them to stay within that church? Because, there's often times where you're just like, why are you even here? Like, I get it. You love the people, but man, is that healthy for them to stick around?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's healthy for them to stick around, but I think the problem is most likely on them rather than it is on a whole bunch of other people. If the common denominator of all the people that they don't like is them, then they're the reason. So no, I don't think it's healthy. Now, do you look at a person and say, hey, maybe you need to find another place to worship where you can respect the leader and all that? I think if the person is being, no question, if the person is being negative, if the person's being toxic, if the person is slamming you, and they're being negative, I think that's when you encourage them, hey, you need to find another place because you're being negative and you're hurting other people. You're being the 12 spies, and they come
Right.
back and they report. You're doing that, and
Right.
you're hurting it.
Mhm.
So people, will say, hey man, I got a person in the church that really, I don't know, I think they stay because of friendship. I always say, keep an eye on that. Keep that,
Okay.
keep an eye on that, because if they start getting negative, if you start hearing it, it's like you got to invite them to be successful elsewhere. You got to invite them to go somewhere else,
That's good.
because all they're going to do is just create damage.
Wow.
And they have a way of doing that. People have a way of weaponizing their preference with spirituality.
Whew, say that again. People have a what?
So, and I think,
Oh, so good. I'm sorry.
I like your response.
That was amazing.
So,
I'm just sorry. People have a way of weaponizing their spirituality. Is that what you said?
they have a way of weaponizing their preference with spirituality.
Oh, okay. Nice. Oh my
You
gosh.
see, isn't that
Yeah.
true?
Absolutely.
Because
100%.
their way is spiritual.
Yes.
Your way is not. No, it's
That's
their
right.
preference, but they spiritualize it. They weaponize their preference with spirituality.
Man.
And people
That's real.
do that all the time. And that's probably what's happening in maybe a situation you're facing, or in other situations you face where that's happening. If the person can stay not being toxic, can stay not, trying to be healthy at least, or not speaking poorly, I guess probably the better term, then that's one thing. But man, if they start getting toxic and negative, you got to invite them to leave. You got to invite them to, like, man, dude, you got to find a place where you can respect the pastor and love. This is not the right place for you.
That's good.
Because they're all they're going to do is just hurt it with that toxic spirit, and that toxic spirit always shows up in an interesting way, especially if they don't like what you're doing. Or again, they're going to weaponize your preference. They're going to weaponize their opinion with spirituality. They're always going to put it under there. And they're going to secretly hold inside of their heart, things would be better if I was in charge. They're always going to hold that in their heart, or things would be different if I was in charge. Things would be better if I was in charge. I love the church. I tolerate the leader. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
You can't let people operate under that.
Yeah.
They need to find a place where they can love and respect the leader.
I need to hand them quit church. Okay, good. No, I honestly, thank you for that. That was phenomenal. So in terms of people, let's just keep it on people, because I had this question about relationship and proximity and how that plays out in leader. So I like to consider myself a young leader. I'm not so young. I'm 40, but I feel young. It's easy to have, guys that you connect with, that you develop relationships with, where you just become one of the guys, right? And I've just been reading a little bit, and I attended a panel discussion on familiarity in ministry. How have you, because you're so personable, you're so easy to connect with, in your years of leadership, what have you learned on keeping a healthy relationship or pastoral relationship or even friendship with people within your church or within your ministry or organization, yet not allowing it to bleed into the space of familiarity where, as they say, familiarity breeds contempt?
Yep. So I think that's a struggle for anybody that is personable, because they find that tension. Here's where it is. If you're personable and you're highly relational and people like you and all that stuff, and you're one of the guys and all that, as you talked about it, that's great. That's awesome. It's a gift. But any strength overdone becomes a liability, and the liability will happen here. Here's where the liability will take place. It's when the person starts to choose friendship over leadership. And this is what I mean. So you start getting friends with someone and you start letting that leader slide a little bit. You let them get away with a little too much. You let them drift a little too far. You let them get a little more toxic. You let them, you notice that you're not the voice in their life anymore. You notice that they don't respond anymore. When you start noticing that, you run into a danger where you're choosing friendship over leadership. And that's a very dangerous place to be. I've seen many pastors do that, and it ended up hurting their church tremendously. Wow. Because they chose the friendship over the leadership. They didn't remain in that leadership role. So I don't think it's a problem I know it's not a problem in general,
Hmm.
but you have to manage the tension. And remember, it's not a problem to solve, it's a tension to manage.
Okay.
The problem's never
That's
going to
good.
go away.
Yeah.
It's not a problem to solve, it's a tension to manage. So you manage the tension by saying, okay, man, if I feel like I'm losing leadership, that is probably more on me than it is on them.
Hmm.
If I'm losing leadership, I'm losing the voice. If I feel like there's a little bit of disrespect, if I feel like they're not, the honors kind of disappearing, I've got to make sure that maybe I pull back a little bit, maybe I heighten up my leadership. I've got to manage that tension. It won't happen with a lot of people,
Right.
but it'll happen with one or two people in your church. You're a personable type of individual, so it's
Yeah.
going to happen with one or two people. I don't think you pull back on the relationship
Okay.
today. What I think is that you keep your antenna up, thinking, I can't let the friendship win over the leadership.
Okay.
I still have to remain the leader.
That's good.
And when you feel it, you got to start pulling back a little bit. You got to have that conversation with them. Hey, I noticed this, and I've noticed, you're not really. And sometimes when I talk about this, you kind of have a little bit of an attitude, or you don't respect it as much, or you don't respond as much. And I can't have that. I still need to be the leader. I want to be a friend.
Yeah.
I think you have to be aware of it. You must catch it early on. If you wait too long, it will end up hurting you.
And if you do wait too long, if you have already crossed that boundary, you said something about have a conversation with them,
Yep.
bring it up, be candid. Is there
Yes.
anything outside of just having that conversation? Do you shift the leader out of their role? How do you? Any other practical steps that one can take if like, hey man, we've gotten to this point, and now this person, not only are they not responding, but they're not even. There's just you love them to life, but it's just there's just too much familiarity there, and you just feel stuck.
Yep. Yep. Well, hard to say how they're going to react.
Hmm.
So I think step one is to have the tough conversation.
Hmm.
And I think the conversation looks something like, "Hey, Muda, I'm the pastor of the church. You're involved in our church. You're a great leader, an important leader. We're very good friends, but over the last several months, I've noticed it's been changing a little bit,
Yeah.
and I feel like our friendship is winning over leadership, and I still have to remain the leader. I still have to be the voice. I still have to be the person that you look to. However you want to say that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Can you do that? Can we make sure that we manage that tension together? And I think the response of their attitude or their heart will determine your next move. If it's
Yeah.
like, you know what, you're right. I apologize on my side, and you apologize on your side. You got to own your side as a leader. Okay, let's just keep that in mind as we move forward.
Yeah.
It might be great. It might be fine. It might be about face. If it's the guy's like, well, what, man? We can't be friends anymore? Is that what it is, bro? They turn into one of those things.
Yeah.
It's like, bro, I can't have this.
Yeah.
And then you might be heading down a different trail.
Okay.
But that's a sensitive thing when you start heading down a different trail, because you start pulling back and they'll know why.
Right.
Hopefully they'll respond right.
Good.
But you do need to manage that. Don't let it go.
Yeah.
I always say pay now or pay later, but if you pay later, you'll always pay more.
Oh man,
So
that's good.
deal with it now. Don't deal with it in a year from now, because it'll
Yeah.
be more expensive a year from now.
No, that's good.
So I would.
That's really
I'd deal with
helpful.
it for sure. Yeah,
Honestly, that's
yeah,
really helpful because, yeah, I've leaders on my team are asking those questions about people on their team and saying, "Hey, I
yep,
feel like I've crossed that boundary, and I know I've crossed that boundary before, and so
yep,
this is just so helpful." So,
yeah,
last question. Can I get one more in there?
yep. Couple
Okay,
more minutes
so
left. Yep,
you get a couple more minutes left. All right.
yep.
So how do you evaluate and assess leadership capacity for individuals?
Mm,
So this is kind of full circle back at the beginning, like, hey, what's our leadership pipeline look like? How do we get people enrolled? So somebody does show up, and maybe, maybe they're influential on their job, maybe they have a great career, or maybe there's somebody who is just fully committed to the team, and you see them serving, they're showing up, they're enthusiastic, but just because everybody does something well doesn't mean they're a great leader, you
that's
know?
right.
So how do you evaluate and assess leadership to even bring somebody onto a leadership pipeline?
Yeah, bringing them into, I think there's a difference. Bringing them to the level of leadership or bringing them into the pipeline.
Okay.
I think the pipeline will assess the level of leadership that they can go to.
Right.
So this might be a future staff member, or it might just be a really high level leader, or just, maybe a head usher, head greeter, just kind of, depending on their ability. The thing that always is interesting to me is I think you have to assess a few items for leaders. One is assessing their leadership capacity by asking the question, do they have the ability to execute? Do they have the ability to rally people close to them? Do they have the ability to build teams? I think we radically confuse in the church management and leadership.
Come on. Yeah,
we radically confuse it. Where it's like, that guy's a leader. I'm like, no, he's not. He's not. He's a great manager, and we need great managers. But he's not a leader. You're expecting this guy to build a team. No. He'll manage the team that you give him. He isn't going to build it.
That's good.
And I think you have to separate those that have the ability to manage what they're given and the ability to build something from nothing.
Yeah, that's good.
And that to me is, again, you can go into characteristics of leadership all day long,
right?
But when you just, putting aside character and putting aside loyalty and putting aside all that for a moment, I want to know, does the guy have the ability to build something, rally people, get people on his team or her team, whatever? Or is it more, hey, here's 10 people, manage that, like an office manager. Here's your 10 employees, manage them. Make sure everybody's doing what they should, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're wanting to build something from nothing, to me, that's where for me personally, is where I separate the biggest thing. Because nothing is more frustrating than when you hand a title to someone, then they don't build. And then, like my own coach says, I have 2 coaches in my life that coach me. They always say, and whose fault is that? What he's pointing it at me, going, you put him there.
Yeah.
Because you thought he was loyal, thought he was faithful, thought he was a good person, but it's like, the dude doesn't know how to build anything.
Yeah.
Now, he can manage something, but building,
two different things.
That's just not who he is.
Two different beasts. Things. Wow.
Yeah, they are. And again, there's a lot to talk about on leadership, but what separates is who can build and who can manage.
Yeah.
And can that person build something? Do they have a track record of building something? And when you have an opportunity, by the way, when you're looking at certain leaders, if you have an opportunity without telling them, without promising anything, sort of a private beta test, if you will, private pilot program, if you have a way of seeing if they can build something before you give them the title, that's always a good thing.
Okay.
It's like if you were on my team and, I don't know, say we were putting together some event where we needed 15 people and, hey, man, Muda, can you help me with this? Recruit 15 people. They're assigned to these areas. It's going to be a 2-day event, whatever. Man, if I see it's like, dude, Muda recruited 15. They had lanyards. It was tight. Everybody was reporting to him. He had a schedule. He recruited the people. He got them on their team. I'm like, okay, the dude knows how to recruit. Now, I didn't tell you. I just said, would you help me with this one project to see if you have the ability to actually function as a leader?
Yeah.
And that's how I would look at it. I'd want to know, can they build anything before I'd ever give them a title.
That's awesome.
Because otherwise you give them a title based on faithfulness.
So often we get that so wrong. My God. I'm just thinking through my own life. I mean, the reason that question popped up is because we're reevaluating that as we speak. We're like, we've got some people in leadership roles and positions that are just not leaders, but we've given them the title already, and they're functioning as best as they possibly can. And so, this is incredibly helpful. Such great content, man. I really appreciate you. This is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Dude, thanks for being on the podcast today. And man, dude, just keep chasing greatness, and sure do appreciate your heart for the kingdom. And you're awesome. Appreciate you, buddy.
Thank you so much for modeling leadership so well. God bless you.
Man, thanks, man. Love you, man. Talk to you soon.
You too. Yeah.